Fresco. I write stuff, illustrates, and broadcast too. And my guest is the great Phillippi Ryan. How you doing?
I'm great. I write stuff and broadcast too. So what a team we are. This is
Yeah, that's right. So high five, like that. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, you have like this incredible like career. Like I'm looking at the back. I mean, not too many people I know have actual Oscars on their
Emmys. They're Emmys.
Emmys. My bad. I'm
see more of them. Look at that.
Yeah, like you've been doing this. So you've been doing this for like a long time, and you've been very successful at what you've done. So I mean, that's kudos to you. So, I'm going to ask this: like, which way did you go first, broadcasting or writing?
Well, that's a great question because when I grew up in really rural Indiana, I loved reading. You know, as we all did, I read everything. You know, books were my only friends. Characters in books were my only friends. I was such a bookish, nerdy, little unpopular little girl. It was pretty pitiful, but you know, it allowed me. All I did was read and watch old movies, which has really served me well as an adult. And I knew that when I read mysteries, you know, Sherlock Holmes and the Agatha Christie books, I knew that I either wanted to be a mystery author or a detective. I thought it might be cooler to be Sherlock Holmes than it would be to write about Sherlock Holmes. So, you know, I have a lot of friends, writer friends, who will say, oh, from the moment I was a little person, you know, I knew I wanted to be a mystery author. And I kind of didn't have that. I loved reading and I loved mysteries and I loved the genre. You know, I loved the secrets and the puzzle and the mystery and the surprise and the page turning suspense. But I wasn't driven to be a mystery author, but I think I was driven to be sort of two things: a storyteller, certainly, and some sort of a person who made a difference in the world. And so that's how, you know, after several years trying different things, which we can talk about, all of which I wouldn't trade, brought me into journalism. And I've been a television reporter now for 43 years, if you can imagine, which is completely nuts. And again, though, what that is telling a good story for a good reason. Mm-hmm. So it is sort of interesting to have that nonfiction background morph, you know, when I was 55, 15 years ago, morph into telling a fictional story. Again, a compelling page-turning story that made a difference in the world, but it was just made up. And so this is the world's longest answer to your perfectly great question, which was journalism first, mm-hmm. And then fiction writing. But all storytelling. It's all storytelling.
Well, actually, see, it's interesting. I've interviewed a lot of best-selling authors, and most of the best-selling authors I do interview, they all come from either a corporate background, they have their medical, they're legal, what I've noticed, what tends to happen, I think, with a lot of fiction authors is what a lot of fiction authors when they're starting, don't really fully realize is there's a lot of structure, discipline, and a lot of the fundamentals in a lot of other businesses tie very much into the craft of writing. Writing is, if you really sit there and think about it, writing, telling stories is essentially problem solving. You're communicating a message to the world. You're trying to, whether in a journalist's case, you're trying to communicate an issue, a character piece sometimes, hopefully something you care about. I'm sure there were some points when you started that you were doing these beat things. You're like, oh God, no, stop. I hate this stuff. But I know like that's how you start. But eventually you get the opportunity once you prove yourself to tell the stories you really want to tell. But that takes structure, discipline, asking questions, research. Novel writing is not that different, honestly. It's a lot of the same tools to get to that result. I could kind of see, like, again, fiction may not have been how you started, but I could also see how you can kind of stumble. It's not that different a world, if that makes sense.
No, and I agree with you a million percent. And a couple of points that you made, there's so much cool stuff to unpack here. But one of the things is, for instance, you talk about the sort of run-of-the-mill general assignment television stories that I covered initially. I would go in the morning and the assignment desk would say, go cover this fire, go cover this political thing, go cover this cat show, go cover the basketball finals, whatever it was. And, people would say, oh my golly, another fire. And I'd be like, no, it's not another fire. This is a specific story about a specific person in a specific place and a specific thing that happened and a specific story that's only this fire. And it was my joy in writing these stories is to make each story be as specific and perfect and different and unique as each story could be, because each story is different. It's not just another fire. And then from the standpoint of storytelling, I, as a general assignment reporter from like 1975 to maybe 1988, which is when I started being an investigative reporter, I wrote a story every day. And it was on the air every day. And at 9 o'clock in the morning, I would go in, and by 6 o'clock at night, that story was on the air. And but the structure was, you had a character who you cared about, a problem that needed to be solved. You want the good guys to win and the bad guys to get what's coming to them. You're following leads and doing research and doing interviews and shooting the video and getting your setting. And you're also taking a very complicated thing and deciding what the most important parts of it are and putting it together in a compelling story with a beginning and a middle and an end. And in the end, you want some justice and you want to change the world a little bit. And every day I would do that. And then I think, okay, so what is that but writing fiction? That is a thriller writer. That is I write psychological thrillers, and legal thrillers. That's exactly what that is. It's exactly the same thing. Not to mention, quickly, the discipline that it takes to know that every day your story is going to be the best it can be for that day. It may not be the best it could be, for all mankind, universally the best story that has ever been written, but it is the best you can do at that moment, and it is going to be done when you promised that it would be done. So that writing discipline, back, as a reporter, I sit at my desk and go, okay, this is going to be as good as it's going to be. And you learn that as a writer every day. When I'm writing 100,000 words in a novel, and I just turned in my 13th novel, some days I think, oh, this is bad. And then but I know enough to know, after having been a reporter, you just persevere and you do the best you can. And it's often better than you think it is. So all of that, the storytelling and the discipline and the understanding of taking a bunch of complicated things and making it be riveting, compelling, page turning. I don't want you to turn the channel when my stories are on TV, and I don't want you to be able to put my books down. So it's that same rhythm of writing and the same goal in writing and in doing an investigative story.
I wish I had you longer today. I do. I think me and you could have a really, really good long conversation, and it's going to be, unfortunately, it's going to be short and sweet. But I will, because there's a lot you said to unpack. But here's the thing: early reporting taught you how to write character. That's what early reporting actually taught you.
Uh-huh.
I'll ask another fun question for you. So when you got into you made it to investigator, however, you put in your time, did your dues, it's like, okay, we trust you now. Let's see what you can do on your own. What did you learn? Now the canvas is all yours, right? They're going to let you, you probably still had other commitments you had to fulfill on a day in, day out basis, but they're basically saying, here's some rope, go out there, find something we really want to see.
Yeah, no, that is a big task, and that's a really interesting question. Let me just give you a tiny little bit of background, because exactly what you're talking about happened. My very first job in broadcasting was in 1970 as a radio reporter. And I got my job as a radio reporter. I promise you this has a point, apropos of what you're saying. Because I had worked in politics. I worked in several political campaigns back home in Indiana. Sadly, no one I ever worked for actually won. So that is sort of when the universe is saying, find another career. Sister, this one isn't working for you. So I was 20, and I went to the biggest radio station in Indianapolis, and I went to the news director, and I said, I'm here to apply for the job as a reporter. And the news director says, okay, that's great. We do need a reporter. Where was your last reporting job? And I'm like, Well, no, I've never been a radio reporter. And he said, okay, well, television, newspapers, magazines? No. He says, have you ever done an interview or put together a story in any kind of a way? And I hadn't. He said, did you go to journalism school? And no, I really hadn't. And he said, sort of long story short, you have absolutely no experience. You're supremely unqualified for this job. He said, you seem like a nice person, and I bet I could teach you to be a reporter, but I don't have time to do that.
Mm-hmm.
He said, can you tell me one good reason why I should hire you as a reporter? And I said, yes, I can tell you a good reason why you should hire me. I said, your license is up for renewal at the Federal Communications Commission right now, and you don't have any women working here. And then I just smiled. And the next day I had my first job in broadcasting. Now, here's why I say this. Here's why I say this. Because I didn't make that up. I had done my homework. I knew that their license was up for renewal, and I knew that they didn't have any women working there. Now, I would not say to any of your thousands of listeners, if you're applying for a job, threaten your potential boss with a lawsuit, and that will definitely get you. You're like, don't do that. Don't do that. But because of the time and because of the situation, and because that smart news director thought, aha, this woman has done her research. This woman came here prepared, and I bet I could make her a reporter. So, but it was back in the day when there weren't many women. There were not many women in broadcasting. Barbara Walters and Leslie Stahl and Jessica Savage and Jane Pauley. I mean, we all got our jobs because we were women. There's no question about that. Jane Pauley even calls us the class of 1970 because it's when the laws were changing and required stations like that to have women on the staff. Now, that doesn't mean so. And finally, back to your question, Josh. So one of the very first stories I was sent to cover was. This was in Indianapolis, and there was this little guy who was the proprietor of an electric train shop. If you can imagine how sort of Dickensian that would look. Mm-hmm. So here's this guy, and he was robbed at gunpoint. Somebody came in, some guy with a gun, and came in, and held the gun in the guy's face and said, give me all your money. And I was assigned to cover the story, my very first police story. And so here I am, little me, with my little microphone and little tape recorder, and I say, how did you feel when the guy came in with the gun? Now, that is a standard question now. I mean, that's like, oh my gosh, what went through your mind? But I said to him, how did you feel when the guy with the gun came in? What went through your mind when you saw that weapon? So there was a police officer there with me at the time. And the police officer called my news director and said, what kind of a question is, how did you feel? Why would anybody ask a question like that? And because that's not the kind of question that reporters asked back then. It was all who, what, when, where, but there was no why, and there was no emotion to it. It was just straight story. But I was new, and I wanted to know how that felt. And that's what you're talking about the character. I saw not a robbery, but I saw a person at the other end of a gun whose life had changed at that moment. And I thought it would be illuminating for listeners to hear. That's the story. You've heard people get robbed all the time, but not that person, and not in that little train store. And so that's what sort of got me on the path of understanding storytelling and understanding how the storyteller can bring their voice to the story by mining the experiences of other people, if you see what I mean. And that's so what you're talking about learning how to write character, that's where that begins. Mm-hmm. Is the characters in the news story are the characters in any story. They're real people to whom something has happened and who have to make a decision as a result of that, and whose lives change as a result of that. And it's our job as writers to explore the possibilities that someone would do, and whether someone makes a right decision or a wrong decision, or whether they emerge from it.
So I'm going to ask this. This is just I'm curious about this part, one of the things I'm learning as a writer now, like, so like I'm at the point where I feel like I'm confident. We'll say I'm good, right? We'll say I'm good. This would say, but not, but yeah, right. But trying to be great. One of the things I realize in fiction is it's not always about what you say, but what you don't, right? And that's a big part of like the actual underpinning of telling a story. My first novel came out last year, and my next novel I'm coming out. I recognize like that was a big, I wouldn't say a full hole in my game, but something I wanted to change going forward, to make it stronger and better. So when I am approaching my scenes with my characters now, I'm looking at actions. I'm looking at showing the actions they're taking, not necessarily telling what that fully means, but showing, not telling. Mm-hmm. And I feel like with being in the journalism realm, that might be because, again, partly because of your constraints. That probably the ability to show and tell a story there is probably a different challenge, if that makes sense. Or am I wrong on that assumption?
Well, it's because there's the medium of video. Yeah. There's another element of it, but I think what's appropriate for what you're talking about, and certainly on point, is that we have this sort of backroom saying in television, which is if it doesn't happen on video, it doesn't happen, because now that's when you see the shots of generic people walking down the street or graphics of something, because you don't have, or the reporter does a stand-up and saying, 3 years ago here at the State House, blah, 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 because you don't have any pictures of that. So pictures are what drives a television story, right? And you always start with your best video. So if you're going to start with your best video in television, in storytelling, when it's on paper, why not start with your best cinematic video? Why not start with, when people have written to me about my books and say, oh, I could just see that. I could just see that. And that's the highest compliment, isn't it? Because you have started the movie in their mind mm-hmm. of what this story is. And the minute they can start, you don't have to tell them too much, but the minute the reader can start envisioning what your story is, they'll be on the train with you to then hear people talk and have things happen once they have the setting template in the story. So, think about reading an audiobook. When you hear an audiobook, if the writer doesn't ground the reader in the setting and the character instantly, you're completely lost, right? Because you can't make that movie in your mind. And then what you're talking about what isn't said, when I just turned in my 13th book, and it went in at the first draft at 120,000 words. And, my editors always just laugh at me because they know that I know that at some point I'm going to cut that to like 95,000 words. And those 25,000 words that I cut, or I just can't do the math, but whatever it is, that is the most fun part for me of writing, is just, they say, it's horrible to kill your darlings. I'm like, dead. I don't need that. If it's going to clog the pacing, if it's going to take people out of the book, if it's tangential or boring, or me showing off what a good writer I am, that goes. And so I look at each paragraph, at each line, and I say, what work does this do? Why is this line here? And so often I'm like, well, the first line, that's just sort of introduction to the paragraph. The second line is sort of a repeat of the introduction to the paragraph. The third line might be the point of the paragraph. The fourth line might be the reaction to the point of the paragraph. And the fifth line is like me trying to be cool. So then you're really left with one line, and that is the line. That's the line you want to keep. So that slashing and burning of the gunk in the book is what makes your story then propel ahead. That editing is when you see the book that you meant to write, and it's in there. You just sort of have to be brave and excavate that away from all the stuff that's clogging it up. And don't you think that's fun? Don't you have fun doing that?
Well, see, my goal is my first thought, my books are smaller. I'm trying to be like, I love dime novels. I love Japanese light fiction novels. I like the smaller. I grew up reading Roger Zelazny, Ray Bradbury, and I love the fact that they told these incredible stories in this really dense space. Mm-hmm. So I get where you're coming from in terms of the cutting thing when you talk about, because what you're trying to do, see, is you're looking at your book and going like, okay, this is a beautiful tower that probably could be, you can cut about 6 floors, because you want as fluid and it's connecting a piece of the story as possible. I think we're slightly different. We're like in different realities. Like you're in the 70 to 100,000 word ranges where you're probably most comfortable, right? I'm trying to keep it between 50 and 60. Oh. So right. I'm trying. Right. So for me, it's not. I do cut too. Like there's definitely a cutting process that goes on. What I've had to learn, and what I learned in the first book, again, I'm doing my second and my third kind of at the same time right now. And what I've learned about this is one, emotional connection is the most important connection when you tell especially in fiction. Journalism, I think requires a little bit more facts, just in terms of people being aware of the context of the event, right? Because you want that so you can see what the impact to said event is. But in fiction, it's more about, okay, what's the story you're telling, and how are the characters reacting to said whatever the circumstance is, right? And so I find, like for me, I'll have fun. Like, for example, I'm writing a novel right now with a killer cupcake, because what the hell not? Like, life's way too short, right? All right. Yeah, exactly. Just go with the flow. But I also realized, like, okay, if I'm going to do that, there has to be a storytelling reason why that's there. I can have fun, and people will come along with you for the ride if they realize you're having a blast. It's a big thing with me. But what I realize is, like, you gotta do more than just have fun. There has to be a reason for it to be there. So when I am going through the cutting process, it's like, these are the 2 questions I ask myself. What's the story I'm trying to tell, right? More importantly, and this is something that, again, this first novel, not so much. I had to learn this. Second novel, what am I trying to make my audience feel? Or what is my character feeling? You don't necessarily have to make your audience choose a feeling, but you have to definitely have a clear idea of what your character's feeling and doing. And if you don't have that, the book doesn't sing. So I have what I call an emotional edit draft, where basically that's just my whole goal there is to figure that out. And then sometimes I retell certain things. Sometimes I'm sure you have something similar where you like, I retell certain things. I make sure it's telling the story I really want to tell, right? Every once in a while, I let myself be surprised, because that's cool. Sometimes you come up with something by accident that's better than you planned, and that's fantastic. It's like, I'm a genius or something, and that's great, right? But I get where you're coming from, because what you're trying to do is you're like, what's the best story I can possibly tell here? And in fiction, you have a little bit more room to breathe. So you probably just go nuts, and then you're like, okay, reel this back in. This is what I'm trying to tell. Am I accurate there, or is it?
Yeah, totally so. Of course so. Absolutely so. It's interesting because I don't use an outline when I write. So sort of anything can happen. Killer cupcakes, anything can happen in the book. And sometimes I think, well, where did that come from? Okay. And I think we could do a whole conversation about how do you get an idea? Why is that?
Can we do another one of these somewhere down the road, please?
Because at some point, you think, oh my gosh, I don't know. And then at some point you think, oh, okay, how about that? Wow, I didn't know that a second ago. How does that work? Where does that come from? Why does that happen? That's just the magic of, imagination. And the more we can cultivate that, the better it works. But I had an executive editor who you'll never meet, so I'm going to imitate her, who, in the story meetings every morning, we would come in and present a story idea. I forgot to tell you about how I got to be an investigative reporter. We'll do that another time. But you would come in with a story idea and pitch the story just like you would pitch a book to an agent or an editor. And then she would look at you and say, she was very annoying. She would look at you and say, why do I care about that? Why do I care about that? And it was really incredibly horrible to deal with her. But she was so right, because the whole key of writing a good story, book, novel, novella, whatever it is that the reader has to care. And so, because if you don't care, you're not connected to it, right? So why are you reading this thing? I don't care. It's boring. Why would I don't care. Nothing's happening. I don't care. But so as an author, when I'm in the process of writing, if I feel, if I think, now what? I ask myself two things. One is, what would a person really do in this situation? Not what this sort of plot-like thing that I might have some sort of idea of in my mind requires them to do. But faced with this, what would a real person really do? How would they react? And sometimes you're surprised by the answer to that. Oh, they would do that. They wouldn't do what I'm making them do. They would give the honest, spontaneous response for them, which is this. And that has helped me get through many a difficult day. But the other question I ask myself in those times is, why do I care? Why do I care? Why does the book care about this now? Why is this important now? Why do I care about this? And sometimes if I say, why do I care? I realize that I have two options. One is cut it out because I don't care and just go on. And that's what's stopping me, is because I don't care. Or two, think, okay, I need to have this. So how can I make this matter for the story? How can I make me care? And if I care, the reader will care. And sometimes, well, almost always, that results in me mining more deeply into my story and into my character to come up with why it matters, which somewhere in my psyche I know, I just haven't accessed it yet. And then the story goes on. So yeah, that caring, that emotional connection, that interweaving of the reader and the writer in the story into being invested in what the character wants. Every character wants something, and every character thinks they know how far they'll go to get it. And then in every good book, they'll go farther than that, and farther than that, and farther than that. And at some point, they wind up in a place that they never thought they would be because of a series of decisions that they didn't think they'd ever have to make, that they do have to make. And then in that decision-making process, when they run up against an obstacle, they have to decide something. And in that decision reveals who the character is, right? They're going to take the good way or the bad way, whatever that means, or the surprising way or the dumb way, or the way that makes them allowed to keep their secret, which then might turn out to be a bad thing. So some of that stuff is, you see what I mean, is that these are real people that our goal as authors is to make the reader be invested in what happens. And that's why you love a book.
Yeah, well, that's why you love any kind of story. I would go, okay, I asked this. Do you leave stuff in just because you had fun with it?
No.
No, never?
No, because it has to mean something for the book. If I have fun with it, and if a reader might think, the what is, huh? Now, I leave stuff in. I put stuff in that may be special to me. Like often we live in we live in Newton, Massachusetts, which is outside of Boston, one town outside of Boston. We have a backyard with a swimming pool. I promise you this has a point. In the non-summer months, the swimming pool is covered with a tarp, which fills up with water, and it looks like a pond. And wild ducks come to our backyard. And every March 14th-ish, they arrive. And now I'm going to sneeze. Every March 14th-ish, they arrive, and they leave in July when the pool opens, because I don't like chlorine. But you'll see in my books, there's always ducks in my books. When there's a scene on the Charles or on a lake, or somebody likes ducks, and there'll be ducks. Now that doesn't matter. It might as well be chipmunks or birds or a stuffed animal or whatever it is. But I'll often refer to ducks, and people who know me know, oh, that's Hank referring to Flo and Eddie, her ducks. But it's not extraneous.
No. I was referring, like, I tend to think the emotions the authors project into their stories translate. I think that, like, the one thing I realized as I've gotten older, I don't strive for the perfect story. I strive for telling the best story I can. And the difference is I realize that I have flaws. We all have flaws. But it's in those, like, unique little flaws that our stories are truly different. Like, if you really sit there and think about it, the same 5 or 6 stories are being told again and again and again and again. But what makes them unique is I can't do what you do. That's impossible. There's only one named Phillippi Ryan. There's only one me, right? So as a result, the part, there has to be something of you in there, because if there's not, no one's gonna get that story. That's why I was asking that question, because it was like you have to have some stuff that's just for you, even if you're still trying to do the best story possible. There's always that little bit of you there. If that,
yeah, and that's not. I don't think that's exclusive, right? I think that's sort of complementary.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely, no, absolutely. I agree with that.
I mean, it's interesting. Joe Finder, Joe Finder, and I were having dinner a year or so ago, in the before times, and I said to him, "What's your new book about?" And he said, "Well, what's your new book about?" And I said, "Well, no, you tell me what your book is about." So he said, "It's about." He says, it's about the daughter of a big pharmaceutical company who finds out something bad about what her family's pharmaceutical company is doing and decides to be a whistleblower. So I said, great. And he says, what is that face? And I said, well, my new book is about the daughter of a pharmaceutical company who finds out that her family's company is doing something bad and decides to be a whistleblower. And we both looked at each other, like, oh no. And I was in trouble because Joe Finder's book was coming out first and I was going to be doomed. And there is this, our log lines were exactly the same. And Joe Finder's book, best-selling book called House on Fire, is a first-person, present tense, chronological, sort of industrial spy kind of story. And my book, The First to Lie, is multiple points of view, dual timeline story about women and how far someone would go to have a child. Completely different. Mine is psychological suspense, domestic psychological suspense. Joe Finder's is a thriller, a flat-out thriller. So we had this same idea, exactly word for word the same idea, but out came, and the books were already done by the time we were talking, out came 2 completely different books, different in every way. So to your point about you bring yourself to it, Joe is harder, cares about finances, cares about spies, cares about action. I'm like family, gaslighting, manipulation, cat and mouse game. That's what my books are. So it's really illustrative to have that very specific example about how we each write our own books, and that's the good part.
Yeah, no, like that's what every author brings to the table. It's we are all ourselves, and that's why, like I said, so it's always about. You just answered my next question: is what do you try to convey in your stories? So, do you think is what you care about based on just your years of reporting, or is this stuff you've always been interested in? Like you said, you started off as a kid being really into telling a story to save the world and all the stuff you read as a kid and things you liked. But it sounds to me like that fascination with Holmes never completely went away, ever. And if anything, it got increased as time goes on.
Yeah. I mean, all of my books have, I don't mean to sound highfalutin about this, but all my books have to do with justice. And what is justice? What is that? Is that legal justice? Is it karmic justice? Is it sort of universal justice? Is there personal justice? Those clearly aren't the same things, right?
No.
So I'm interested in that. I'm interested in truth. What is true? Is there a true truth? Is there what someone tells you? Is there what someone tells you over and over? Is it what you hope is true? Is it what you wish were true? Is it what you tell yourself is true? Is it what you try to make someone else believe is true? Is there a true truth? And how do we know that? And how do we as human beings deal with each other about what is true? I mean, we talk about unreliable narrators. For instance, how many people who I've interviewed as a reporter, how many people have lied to me, flat out looked at me and lied to me? And when I find out that they're lying to me and do a story about it, I've had people call and say, how can you do this to me? and I say, you did that. You did this to you. You did this to you. I didn't do this to you. So it's that kind of, you talk about unreliable narrators, as I was saying. An unreliable narrator is telling you the thing that they think is true, that they honestly think is true, that in their world is true. But there's another truth, and that's why my cat and mouse game books, like The First to Lie and like The Murder List, um, that's why those work. Because sometimes that psychological manipulation, that gaslighting, that deception, that power game, that cat and mouse game, that's just as deadly and lethal as a knife or a gun. Psychology, the manipulation that people do to each other. And so that's what my interest is. Why do people do? What would get you to? I mean, what would get you to murder someone? How strongly would you have to feel about whatever it is to make it be? I mean, our books have to be believable, right? You wouldn't think no one would do that. You have to think someone would do that. So, what is it about the character, and what is it about their life, and what is it about their goal that would make them do something so terrible to someone else? That's what I'm going for. Motivation, and truth and justice.
You like trying to understand why people do what they do. Like that sounds to me like a very big part. Even when you were a reporter, and even now writing fiction, that's a big part of who you are. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. I think it's fascinating because we all make decisions every day based on our experience, and based on our desire, and based on our secrets, and based on our hopes, right? We want something to happen, even if we're not really, we think we know what's good, but what if it isn't good? What is good? What is the right decision? And so the motivations that people have to do a good thing or to do a bad thing, and whatever that even means, can be sometimes be so relative, but sometimes it isn't. And I think that's really fascinating.
No, it is. That's why I interview people. It's always fascinating to get
Yeah.
a sense of their story. So I got, I think, a fun last couple of questions before we have to wrap this bad boy up. Unfortunately, like I said, I get the feeling I could talk to you a lot. You're a very passionate person about what you do.
Thank you, and you too. Thank
Yeah.
you. Bring me back anytime.
Here's the thing. I get the feeling, in spite of everything you've seen throughout the years, you're still a romantic at heart. What I mean by romantic is you very much have been able to maintain your ideals. And again, you're dealing in an industry where people lie to you all the time, not just the people you're interviewing, sometimes the people you work with. It's a bit like journalism can be it is a surprisingly dishonest business for trying to find the truth. It's amazing how much deception you have to go through. And I've seen some people become very jaded. I don't get that with you at all. I feel like you've been disappointed, but I also feel like you've been able to put that kind of behind you. What was your secret?
I'm very curious, so I try not to. It's such a good question. I've never really thought about that before. I'm very curious. I'm very optimistic. I try to understand people. I just sort of persevere. I wonder what the next story is. When somebody does something that is inappropriate or bad or surprising or disappointing, I just sort of try to figure that out. I think people, each of us has our own struggles, and try to understand what that might be. I try to sort of have a core of my own confidence and joy in the world, and I feel lucky to be here now, even though the world is absolutely as insane as anybody could possibly imagine, and worse than that. I count my blessings a lot. I mean, I'm here, and knock on wood, and I'm safe, and I'm happy, and I have a job that I can do sitting right here at this desk. So there's lots of good. There's lots of good in the world, and I just sort of try to focus on that. And I also know that as a reporter, as an investigative reporter, I can change people's lives. Our stories have changed laws, have changed lives, have sent people to prison. I've got millions of dollars in refunds and restitution for consumers. I've gotten people's homes out of foreclosure. So, you think, I'm here, I have this one life. I'm going to do the best I can at everything I do. I'm going to try to be as happy as I can, and remember, people always say, someday we'll laugh about this. And I think, yeah, why don't we laugh sooner?
I actually, wow, yeah, I wish I had you longer. But no, it's like in this time, one of the things so this was the decision I made. Okay, we have all lost our minds. I'm not even gonna argue the debate. We've all lost our minds. We're all insane. I've acknowledged I was crazy to begin with, so like it didn't hit me that hard. I was already there. But this is what I decided to do. For the rest of my life, I'm going to do what I love with people I love. That's it. I kept it very simple. I'm going to be grateful for everything that comes my way. The opportunity to meet wonderful people such as yourself. You've had an incredible career, and I not just the Emmys. It sounds to me like you have been smart enough to take advantage of the opportunities that I've given for you. You've worked hard to create opportunities for yourself, and your passion has probably carried you through some very tough times as well. And that's just, again, I don't know you very well, but that's the impression you've given me in the time I've known you. So like I said, so for me, I was like, I got 4 books I want to release this year. That's my goal. I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
I taught myself how to draw. I accidentally, I'm doing all kinds of just neat little things. Some things you discover. I figured out the secret to the Grinch's smile. I accidentally discovered how to do a porn stash thanks to Lego. I'm letting all these little joys go carry forward, because in one very real true sense, and it's something I've always kept in my mind, the world hasn't changed. All of this stuff has come before. We will get through this like we've gotten through everything else in life. History repeats itself. So while we're in this really odd, weird, insane time, be grateful for the things you do have. Be grateful for the opportunities you do have. Like, for example, today was an opportunity for me to meet you. Nice to meet you. You're awesome. And beyond all that, keep going. Life doesn't end. You can choose either to be living or dying, and I just rather keep living. And that's just how I look at it. That makes me kind of fearless, which may not be entirely a good thing, but I acknowledge I'm already crazy, so that's just me. So everybody's got to make their own decisions about that. So I do find reasons to laugh, even now, especially now.
Definitely so. Well said. Very well said.
So, okay, you got a book out, or it came out not too long ago. So do you want to take this opportunity to tell the world why it's awesome?
Oh, thank you. Then the book from last year, which I'm very proud of, is The Murder List. See how they made this cover, which is sort of a
kind of gangster.
This just won the Anthony for Best Novel of the Year, the Anthony Award for Best Mystery Thriller of the Year. So that is pretty amazing.
That's awesome. Congrats.
That was great. Yeah, Alex Segura and Laura Lippman and Steph Cha and Rachel Hazel-Hall were the other nominees. So pretty happy about that. So this won The Murder List. And my newest book is The First to Lie, which, if people said, which just got a starred review from Publishers Weekly, calling it stellar. So this book, let's see, if I told you five things about The First to Lie, that would be a devastating childhood betrayal, an undercover reporter who's in too deep, a beautiful sailboat on the Chesapeake Bay, a rich and powerful family, and an ice pick that is not used for ice. So The First to Lie is two smart women facing off in a high-stakes cat and mouse game to get revenge for a devastating childhood betrayal. But which person is the cat and which person is the mouse? And that is The First to Lie.
That is The First to Lie. All right. So
look, find me on Facebook, Hank Phillippi Ryan. Find me on Instagram, Hank P. Ryan, and Twitter, Hank P. Ryan. And sign up for my newsletter. If you're an author, if you're writing, I'm on a blog called careerauthors.com, which is only designed for people who want to make a career of being an author, careerauthors.com. So I urge you all, if you're interested in writing, to come to that. Or if you're interested in reading and meeting authors, I'm part of an organization called The Back Room, which has Zoom interviews, essentially one-on-one, as one-on-one as you can be in Zoom, with the best authors that we have right now. So go to The Back Room Just search for that and see who's on our next panel. We've had Heather Gudenkauf and Lisa Unger and Angie Kim and William Kent Kruger and Hannah Mary McKinnon, everybody that you can possibly imagine that you would love to talk to. And we go into breakout rooms. It's a great way of meeting people and a great way of connecting. Karen Dion, you know her, who wrote The Marsh King's Daughter and The Wicked Sister. She and I came up with this idea, and it's just been amazing. So I invite you. It's limited space, so check it out quickly and sign up for the events.
So I'm going to say this again. I hope I get another chance with you, a longer chance with you. I think you have an incredible story that we just barely scratched the surface of. I will say, you should be very proud of everything you've done. Sounds like you've had an amazing career in life. Awesome. And everybody else, thank you very much for watching this episode of Just Joshing. If you want to support the channel, subscribe to my Twitch, twitch.tv/JustJoshingPodcast. I'm on YouTube as well, Joshua Pantelleresco. Stay inspired, keep shining in the chaos, and I'll talk to you guys tomorrow with 2 interviews to keep things growing. All right, guys, take care of yourselves.